Welcome back, folks, to the Get a Grip on Life podcast. On today's show, I have Sylvester Boyd Jr. It's going to be a fun talk. But before we get to him, if you're listening to podcasts, you want to start a podcast. Most people do that listen to podcasts. I would say 1 out of every 4 of them, something like that. Before you even get started or anything, go to getagripstudios.com. Place to start podcasts. Get Scotty in the booth right there. He'll take care of you. But for right now, we got Sylvester Boyd Jr. on Get a Grip on Life. Welcome to the show, Sylvester.
How are you? Thank you.
I'm doing well. And yourself?
I'm doing wonderful.
So you, in your bio, it says that you have a laser focus on truth while making historical connections. And that you have traveled the world covering issues such as race relations, perseverance, disparities, and education and current events. Where does your laser focus on the truth come from?
I think everything starts with 2 things: truth and respect. You got to be, people have to be respected. And a lot of times that's missing, and that causes a lot of problems in the world from what I've observed in my travels and in my studies as well. I'm a graduate of Chicago State University in Chicago, and I have a degree in history and geography. So my degree fits in, but I've also worked for an airline for about 12 years. I was the 3rd African-American crew chief for American Airlines out of O'Hare Field, one of the world's busiest airports. And there I saw a lot of what is across the world, basically. And I've had the pleasure of loading my crew loaded one of the first 747 aircraft back in the day. So it's back in the day, it's a while back. Basically, my focus on the truth is nothing is right unless you have the truth at the base of it. Falsehoods can be very devastating in the long run. They erode any society, they erode any family. So falsehoods are something that we should avoid. And I think we, as a nation here in America, we have a problem with the truth and really facing the truth. We've kind of been a society that has told ourselves some lies or untruths, or wherever you want to put it, for the last 400 and some odd years. Unless you give the truth, you'll never get to what is just and right.
You see, there are versions of the truth, though, that I think, you come at it from your perspective in life. So when one says that they're speaking the truth, there's a sense in which they're speaking their truth. When someone says that, someone's lying, that means there's an intent to deceive. When somebody's living in a falsehood, it means there's a sense in which they're naive. Are we naive to the truth? Or have we been deceived? Or is there something else going on, Sylvester?
I think the truth is very painful. If you do something wrong, or you are in a situation where you're committing wrong acts, the truth would be very painful when it comes to taking it out into the light of day. Truth is done in darkness. Lies are done in darkness. Truth is done in light. I'm one of these people that think that there's not too much gray area. Either something is wrong or something right. Now, your perspective may be different. You may live in a different society, but truth stays the same. If I steal something from you, I stole something from you. Now, my perspective, my culture, and all the other things don't have anything to do with that. That's a fact that I stole something from you. So the truth is I did that. And so you can distort the truth, but then it becomes a lie. And it's not really an individual thing to say what truth is and what truth isn't. Truth is truth. Just like life is life and death is death. There's certain things that I always think are principles of life. We all are the same in a sense that We are all born, we all live, we all die. There's no difference in anyone on the planet.
No,
We all
that's the
share the,
truth.
that's the truth. And like I said, it's undisputed truth.
No, it's
I
undisputed
like
for
to
sure.
truth. Yeah. So, the sun rises and the sun sets. There are certain things that are just true. Lies are lies, truth is truth. And basically, if you go too far from what is the truth, then you get to the ground of being untrue and lying. So that's the way I see it. I've noticed that in society. I've studied the communism, Marxism, capitalism. So I've studied a lot of in my background. I've studied a lot of the isms of the world. The fact is that all people have to be governed, but they have to be very careful about who they pick to govern them. That's the whole point. If you don't be careful about who you select as your leader, you and don't ever follow a leader blindly somewhere. Your loyalty should be to your country or your family. That's where loyalties belong. Or to if you're in the military, you'd be loyal to the people around you. Those types of things you need to be loyal that way, but not just be loyally following the leader wherever the leader says go. I mean, we went through. I see a lot of parallels in our right now in America to Nazi Germany in the year 1933. When Adolf was rising to power, and there's a lot of people that follow Adolf, but they followed him into a situation where the city of Dresden got firebombed and incinerated, just incinerated a bunch of people. So you got to watch where you're going. Uh, we know right from wrong. I think it's intuitive in every human being. You pretty much know right from wrong. There's you can be educated a certain way or think a certain way, but if I steal, that's wrong. If I mistreat someone, instinctively that certain things are wrong. It's ingrained in the human species. So basically, we are not following a lot of time what's best for us as far as we know right from wrong, but then maybe I'll get a little money out of this deal or something else that comes in, intrudes into our sense of who we are and what's right and wrong. We know instinctively. If I came into your studio today and hit you for some reason, you know, that's wrong. It's simple. If I go down the street and I throw a rock through a window, that's wrong. You know it. Just I don't care what religion. I don't care where you are in the world. Wrong, stay wrong. And I think this thing about the truth a little bit is not where we should be. We do it in America. You look at our Constitution, our Bill of Rights, and all of that. Hey, the documents are perfect. I admire. I just totally admire the people that wrote the documents, but they weren't made for women. They weren't made for black and brown people or Asian, anybody that's other than landed white gentry at the time they were written. That's who the landed means you own some land, aristocracy, and you're a white male, then you're in good shape. They weren't written for anybody else. And that has haunted this country for the last 400 something years. I mean, it's because we didn't, all men are created equal. Well, if you're equal, you can't have slaves. They just don't mix. It's like oil and water. Uh, African Americans and many other races of people were brought to America across what they call the Middle Passage from Africa. And they were brought here simply for one thing: labor, free labor. And if you get free labor, then you become wealthy from the labor that was provided. So these types of things are things that we distorted. We make excuses for them, but we know what's wrong and what's right. We know that. But to do it and have the will to do it, now there's the question. So far in America, we've never had the will to do exactly what was right. We
So,
know it. Slavery's wrong, and you know that.
of course, but you covered a lot there. So I want to loop back to the beginning because I'll lose the beginning because I think what you said at the beginning of it is very important. And that is the idea of leadership and following leaders. Okay. And one of the things that I find very interesting, and I want to ask you, but I'm going to have a hard time saying it and perhaps remaining neutral on it. Because you're going to say, well, what does that mean? And we may have to unpack it a little bit more so that you fully understand. So one of the things that I think is difficult for me to understand is when somebody says that they're a leader of a community. So for example, you could have someone say like, I'm a leader in the Black community and the African American community, or I'm a leader in the LGBTQF, whatever the letters are, community. And they say that, they make that statement. And to me, that's very dangerous because the Black community in Canada, and I'm sure in the United States, is probably quite capable of thinking for themselves. And to say that, you could say Michael Colligan is a leader in the white community. Well, that's ridiculous to say, actually. So if somebody said to Sylvester, Scott Wachter, the producer of the Get a Grip on Life podcast, is a leader in the white community. That doesn't make any sense to anybody. In fact, it's ridiculous to say that. But you hear a lot of this from various groups in the United States, and particularly in the United States, but you hear it in Canada as well. And you listen to it, and instantly my guard is up because I often think that, hey, you're talking about a lot of people there. They probably have a lot of different ideas. And it's, for me, this idea that someone can speak on behalf of a victimized group or on behalf of somebody, let's say transgendered people or women, for example. You're not talking about coherent interest groups. You're talking about very different people. And there's something about that I look at and I see as suspect to me. Hang on. How did you become the leader? Who are you speaking on behalf of? And is there a coherent consensus among those people that you're describing that they all agree with your ideas? And oftentimes when I encounter people that speak on behalf of a group of people or have chosen to speak on behalf of a group of people, I often find that actually not many of those people agree with them. And maybe they're using those people in order, whether they be, German citizens or African Americans or, people of the LGBTQ community or whatever, to further their own ends. And so how do we address this idea of leadership and following people, as you discussed earlier, with respect to, them capturing the power of a group, or so-called in a way, without any election or any democracy within that group allowing them to project that? Now, there are those that can, like Martin Luther King would be one of those people that historically we would look back and say, yes, the man spoke on behalf of a group. But there are not that many that I can really count on and look to that I would say those people are about self-aggrandizement and about enriching themselves or using those people. How do you deal with that, Sylvester?
Okay, you're talking about monolithic societies. Okay, and in basically a monolithic society, everybody kind of is the same. In the world, we have places where everybody kind of looks alike because you don't have a racial dynamic. America, Canada, a lot of countries do have mixed racial dynamics. You go to Japan, you go to Southeast Asia, you go some other places. I've been to Copenhagen, Denmark. Just mostly white, blue-eyed people. That's just the way it is. So they'll think a little bit more alike because they don't have as many differences inculcated within them. But I think you do have to have leaders. You have a president. Okay, you have a prime minister. So there's a leader who speaks, and you have a parliament. We have a Congress. So they're leaders. Those are leaders who speak for a lot of different groups and fashions. So you got to think about how those people represent people who may not think exactly like them. I think a congressman may not represent every idea that I have within me. A senator may not agree with some of my viewpoints, but he is then not just like a black leader. He is the leader of one of the leaders in the United States Congress, and he represents a group that may not be, or she may represent a group that may not be totally aligned with every single thing they do. So leaders, someone has to lead. I think I alluded to it a little earlier, countries have to be led. Groups of people always select someone, whether it's a major country or a little village on the side of a hill. There's people in that group that will come to the fore that the other people respect enough to let them lead them to some degree. But they don't have to be monolithic. I don't think anyone is totally monolithic. You can go to a country that has all people that look alike, have the same language, and you'll find differences amongst those people. You know, in Spain, you have that's good. Just take Spain for example. In Spain, you have the Basque separatists. The Basques want to separate from the country of Spain. Okay, so I studied this stuff in detail. Uh, I always compare people to always wanting to have respect. That's number one. Everyone wants respect. Women want respect. African American want respect. Europeans want respect. Now, respect is a funny thing. Most time you need to give respect to get respect. Most of the time, an oppressed people anywhere in the world that is oppressed by another group will always resent that. It's universal. That's like one of those facts I just gave you a little while ago. You know, if I do something to you, you're going to resent it. If I steal something from you, you're going to resent that I stole something from you. As simple as that. You're going to resent it. It's human nature. There's certain principles. I'm going to be writing another book. I'm on my third book now. I'm going up to my fourth. The next book will be called Fault Lines, and it's going to talk about fault lines in human society. And I'm looking very much forward to doing that because I see the same mistakes being made over and over and over again. Human beings, this is the pattern. We have a war. We settle things for a while. We learn a little bit from the war or whatever it is, and then we go right back. Several generations forget what happened, and we're right back to the same thing.
Are we in a cultural war right now?
Here we are. Here we are. We're in a cultural war. In America, now in Canada, I imagine it's similar, but your history is a little different from ours. I was just talking to Scott, I believe, and I was telling him I like Canada. I've been up there. I've been on Dundas Street in Toronto, and the Eden Square Mall. So I'm familiar with your town, and I'm familiar with Canada because I had to study Canada very deeply in my studies. And your history is a little different from ours because when the slaves in America were free, the place they wanted to go as far as North, and they were guaranteed almost to be free of everything when they got to Canada. So Canada was like a beacon to them.
Yeah, it was the destination of the Underground Railroad, the final destination in some senses.
Right. So
Although we lack a perfect history when it comes to First Nations and African Americans and that, the historical narrative, the idea of the truth, as you brought up earlier, when we look at history, so right now, one of the things that I see happening, you have the 1619 movement in the United States, which is a movement. I'm going to call it a movement because that's what it is. What they're saying is we need to reinterpret history. And we need to teach it from the perspective of this rather than from this date rather than that date. So they're saying the fundamental date is 1619, the day the first African slave was brought to America. That's when America was founded, and America is founded upon that. Whereas the current narrative is one of heroism, independence from tyranny, throwing the tea off the boat in Boston, And, Canada has a different perspective on that. The American Revolution in British history and Canadian history, it's changed over the course of my lifetime, but it used to be called the First and Second American Rebellion. So the first would be the American Revolution would be the first American Rebellion. The War of 1812 would be the Second American Rebellion. So you can look at things differently and call them different names, and it changes the narrative and the structure and the truth of the matter. Is it helpful to reinterpret the American narrative in this fashion?
I think it's helpful to look for the truth. We go back to the truth. What is true? Did my ancestors come across the ocean in something that was called the Middle Passage, and then were, first of all, slaves and gave free labor, then freed by Abraham Lincoln in the Emancipation Proclamation, and became free people, but still had no money, no place? Okay, if I've been given everything by you to take care of me as far as food, clothing, shelter, and then you say, all right, you're free, so you just laid me off. Now what do I do? Now that was the condition of the African slaves. You were free, fine, but now where do I go? What do I have? No land, I have no property. We were supposed to get, according to some people, something that have been written, because in a mule. That never materialized. Had that happened, you would find minorities in a better position today because they would have an economic basics to move forward as a group. You show me a person that does not have income and wealth, I'll show you a poor person, number one. But number two, I'll show you a person that probably doesn't have much time to think about the politics surrounding him, doesn't have enough time to figure out who leads him or her. So economics is probably the one thing that America has had over most other countries in the world for quite some time, going way back to that kind of time. Some people got very rich, very, very rich, and the majority of people just in America has always just been above the poverty line or just below the poverty line. And that is not by accident, that's by design. Truth is what you see that is true. If slavery is an evil thing, then it's evil. And the people who perpetrate that have committed an evil deed. It's not that I want to go back and punish everybody for that, but you got to say it like it is until you get to the point that you get the truth, the real truth. Our labor, African, I would probably be in some village in Lagos, Nigeria, or Nairobi, Kenya. I would be part of a tribe in Africa had not you needed me to pick cotton in the South or to cut sugarcane. That was exploitation. That's a truthful thing. You can't change it. You can run from it, but you can't hide from it. It will always be there. The people who were exploited will always resent the fact that their ancestors were exploited until something in the United States, I always felt that you have to make an apology. That was wrong, not just to the black and white, the American Indian. What happened to him? And that's the true American. I always had a problem with Columbus discovering America. Columbus did not discover America. People were here. That's like me being in my living room and somebody drives up in a car and says, wait, I discovered your house. Crazy. It's not truthful until you get back to that root of truth. What happened is that they had the valuable land. Europeans wanted it. They kept coming and they took it by the barrel of a gun. That's truth. That's not, you can't fuzz that up.
That's not 100% true.
Well, it's mostly. And here's the point.
I mean, that's a version of the truth. I mean, it's not 100% true. And what I mean by that, I think you're correct. But can I make a distinction here for a second? And I want to ask you if you agree with this. So, North American and South American chattel slavery of Africans, is like no other slavery in history. So oftentimes you hear about slaves in the Roman Empire or slaves like this, and they were slaves. There were slaves in the sense, maybe in, but the idea of capturing somebody from a different continent and then putting them in a ship for 2 months or whatever period of time is in the hull of a ship, like and then sailing them across the ocean to a new land, completely destroying any connection they had to their culture, their language. There's nothing like American chattel slavery of Africans. We don't have anything. A lot of times we'll try to mix slavery, like the study of slavery, but really what happened in those years, from say late 1500s or 1600s to the middle 18th century in North America, there's really nothing historically like it. Would you agree with that? That's a unique situation?
I agree 175% if there's such a thing.
Okay.
But I also think the way you remedy some of the resentment towards that happening, because resentment is always there.
No, but hang on one second. Hang on one second. I want to ask you a question. Are you a descendant of those people on both sides, your mother and father's side?
Yes, I am. Yes,
okay.
I am. I can trace my family back to slavery.
And is there, and this is maybe an awkward question, maybe weird for me to ask, but are you ashamed of that heritage, or is there some negativity within the community of the African American is a culture that's a different thing than African people or people from the Caribbean? Well, I mean, the people from the Caribbean have a lot in common, but African Americans are kind of a unique culture onto their own, and they have their own literature, their own a whole host of different things. Is that heritage of being freed slaves something that the African community is ashamed of, or is it pure resentment?
No, we just talked about monolithic societies just a moment ago. We don't all think alike. We don't all act alike. Here's the point on that particular question, is that I'm very proud to be an African American. I'm very proud of my heritage. I'm very proud of, I can go through the book, and for people who have sort of had a sort of a foot on the neck, so to speak, to accomplish what we have accomplished, I'm extremely proud to be an African American. I got examples all through history. I'm a historian. In during World War II, the Tuskegee Airmen.
Sure.
Black people weren't supposed to fly airplanes.
Sure.
Well, they just one of the most distinguished records in World War II, because the heavy, what they call the heavy bombers that flew over Berlin and Nazi Germany, popped up pretty good. And the 99th Pursuit Squadron, based out of Italy, I believe, not Italy, France. Basically, they painted their tails red so you know who they were, and they never lost not one airplane, not one. I keep repeating it, not one bomber. Their mission was to escort the heavies and get them back safely, and they did not lose one. They actually sunk a ship that was not for a fighter plane to do during World War II. Then in 1936, I believe, Jesse Owens, we were talking about Hitler's pure Aryan race, and he made a mockery of that. So no, I'm very, very, very proud. I know.
So why isn't the narrative? Why is the narrative? Because one of the things that I was a history and English major in university, and I took 2 courses on African American fiction, and a course on African American history, and it's fascinating. It really is, and there's such a rich history of literature there. You go back to Langston Hughes and Frederick Douglass, Zora Neale Hurston, and the Native Son. I can't remember the guy's name who wrote the book. And then Your Eyes Were Watching God. You have the Go Tell It on the. There's a rich history of Black American fiction. And I don't hear reference to that. I constantly from the community is reinterpreting the narrative of victimhood. I think that's there, and I agree with it. I'm not saying that's not true. And certainly you're talking about the greatest catastrophe to happen to any people in the history of humans that we know of in history. But also there's also a narrative of there is a lot to study and to point to that is positive in their culture. And you don't hear much of that from people that, in 2020 that are discussing these issues. Why is there, and there's a question I want to ask you at some point about number 42. I remember his number.
Jackie Robinson.
Jackie Robinson. I want to ask you a question about Jackie Robinson in a second. But why is there not more, instead of this, resentment? It's almost like there is and I've talked to people where they don't know who Langston Hughes is. They don't know who Zora Neale Hurston is, but they're angry about something. I think there needs to be a rediscovery of all of us. I'm a Canadian, but of Americans of all colors, of the rich literature and history of the people that were once enslaved. Why is there not more focus on that? And why is the focus so much on anger and resentment and damage in 2020? Is it a social media thing that people don't have the time to go read a book? What is it about that?
Okay, I'll give you one good answer. I think education. Our educational system is, especially minorities, don't get a pure look and taught their history. You have to teach a child. For me to know what I know, I had to go to school. I had to go to a university. I had to go through college. And then my experience in America has been somewhat unique. I've had the experience of living in all African American situation. Then I lived my folks moved near Chinatown, and we had Asians, Puerto Ricans. I call it the little UN neighborhood. Then my family moved to Michigan, a little town called Allegan, Michigan. And my classmates, there's only 5% African American. So I've had the experience that most people don't get of actually living in all Black, a mixed society, and then on top of that, living in an all white society. So I can compare. Then on top of that, I've lived in the country, I've lived in the city, I've lived in the suburbs, and I've had this. On top of that, I've had the experience of traveling throughout the world, from to Denmark, Puerto Rico, Venezuela. I mean, just a whole. I'm not going to enumerate the whole list of places I've been. So I have a rich knowledge of human beings. And you get hung up on this racial thing.
Mm-hmm.
It is about the craziest dynamic you could ever have. I always say there's only one race on planet Earth, and that's human, the human race. I'm human before I'm anything.
There's something crude. There's something crude about. So there's something that's kind of floats by. And this is what I was talking about, a leader in the Black community and how ridiculous it is to say that somebody's a leader in the white community. It's like, no, you can't be a leader in the white community. Our leaders are democratically elected. And there's like an inference there that the leaders of the Black community are not represented in Congress or in the Senate, and that they need other leaders, and that their voice needs to be projected from other people that are not elected. There's something weird. Like if you went to some person that happened to be of Caucasian and said to them that you're a leader in the white community, they would think you're ridiculous. Like that's like a ridiculous thing to say. And so what I want to ask you is is there a way to coalesce in 2020? There seems to be an inclination towards violence that is, unique to this time. You have the Black Lives Matter movement. And we talked about, if I come and steal something or I throw a brick in your window, that's happening actually. And right now, how do we as a society quell that violence? So quell it, and that's different than suppressing it or repressing it. How do we stop that violence and move the narrative forward in a progressive manner that is not, in a way, I don't know how to put it the right way, but that is welcoming to all people at the same time. Is that possible?
It is possible, but we have to go back to truth again. That's my right back to truth again. When I think a police officer who does his job and does it right and is there to serve and protect everybody equally is worth his weight in gold. Got nothing against a police officer. Matter of fact, I think it's one of the bravest things to be as a police officer.
Tough job.
But when you shoot a black kid or a Mexican kid or any other minority, and you wouldn't have shot a white kid for that same thing, that brings up a rage. That brings up the and here's the other thing: the court system in America. I also, in my new book, I'm gonna probably have a thing called the American justice system and injustice system. In America, we have two justice systems: one for Europeans and another one for everybody else. And the facts bear it out.
I got to
There's
push
a
back
lot
on that. I'm going to push back on that, and I agree with you that there are policies when you look at massive groups of people. Okay, so let's say we do separate people based on their ancestry and their origin. You're going to see trends, but how do you separate an individual's decisions, whether he be of any ancestry, his own decisions in his life, no matter how he was raised, and then I think there's a conflation there between an individual's decisions in their life and what they've chosen to do and their background. So their background can be, hey, I came from this background and this happened and that happened, and now I'm in the criminal justice system, and we need to reform the criminal justice system. How do you take to me, there's a conflation between statistical information and an individual's decision. When you get down to the individual, you're not really dealing with the statistics. You're dealing with the individual. And are there policies that tend to hurt different statistical groups? Are those policies designed to hurt those statistical groups? That's one question. The second question is, how would you then take that and then distill it down to the individual? This person is a criminal, that person is not a criminal. Or this person committed the crime, or this person is in the justice system. How do you separate that? That's very difficult.
Okay, well, I'll give you good examples of what I see. We go to court all the time, and there's a black or brown defendant sitting, being the victim of a crime or actually perpetrating a crime, and they're tried by, you know, an all-white jury. How many times do you see this is just wrong? It's wrong, and it's clear as the day to me. Do you see a white individual being tried by an all brown or black jury? You don't see it. It doesn't happen. It's built-in bias. It's built right into the system. That's what happened. You don't see white people being tried by black people, but you can see all the time the opposite. Then another situation is when somebody is wrongly convicted. Okay, I don't see as many European people being wrongfully convicted for something as I do see brown and black people. The system is corrupt. We have to face the truth. The thing about truth, I keep coming back to truth. I always said, until white society looks and sees what they have done to some of the other people, not other Europeans, but other people, the Indians, the Mexicans, the blacks, the Asians. They were locked in World War II. They locked up all the Asians and put them in internment camps. They were American citizens. They had all the rights of American citizens. They were Asian. All of a sudden, they were a different threat than somebody that was put in a camp of Nazis. They were Nazis. They were German. So you got to look at facts. And I always say we go down the river of denial. A lot of people go, and I think Europeans tend to go down the river of denial not the one in Africa, but denial. They not deny the facts. Okay, the facts aren't what they are, and until you look at the facts and say, okay, this is what happened. We want to rectify it. Let's take South Africa, apartheid. No, terrible system. But they had a truth and reconciliation committee after. They admitted the wrong. The people that you have to come to that type of thing in the United States. Until we do, we're going to always have the violence because the court system, where do you go? If you're being treated unjustly in the court system, you're being, law enforcement is treating you unjust. Where do you go? The only outlet naturally would be violence. And I'm not saying violence is a good thing. I hate violence. Okay. But I'm saying that's a natural outgrowth of the system that we have. And until we change that, and until white America, and I'm going to say it clearly, I don't bite my tongue. I'm a very frank and candid person. Look in the mirror and see what, the Indians were marched from the east to the west, okay, because they had the land in the east was very valuable. So we better march these folks out to out west in something called the Trail of Tears. So not just the Middle Passage. Now we got something else called the Trail of Tears, which were the Native Americans. So when you look at history, I look at history for facts and clarity. I don't look at it with thinking that African Americans are better than Europeans or any of that. I go to the facts. What were the facts? And it's like prosecuting a case. If you're a lawyer, you prosecute a case by getting the facts and then bringing them forward and stating your case. My case is that white people have exploited black and brown people because if you go back,
hey, white people are a very diverse group of people, actually.
I understand that. I do.
When you say white people, right? It's interesting because like that term is thrown around quite loosely. There's a lot of different kinds of white people, actually.
Sure. When I was a kid, there was a big thing about the Italians and your nationality. I know that the Irish. If you're Irish, then you were lower. Okay, I've studied history pretty good. I kind of looked at all the
right, but I mean, so these interventions. Okay, so let's talk about Jackie Robinson for a second. So I don't know if it was 10 years ago or 15 years ago. MLB came out with their greatest baseball moments of all time. I don't know if you remember this. Do you remember this? I think it was 10 years ago or 15 years ago, right? And Jackie Robinson was number 2. And Cal Ripken was number 1. Okay. And I'm a Canadian. I don't even like baseball that much. I like the Blue Jays. I played a lot of baseball, but never a big baseball fan. But I thought to myself, that's interesting, never mind the greatest moment in baseball history. That may be one of the greatest moments of the American 20th century, maybe, right? So I started to, forget about baseball. That may be, one of the greatest moments of the American 20th century. You have, maybe the victory in the Second World War, Jackie Robinson, civil rights, whatever you want. Like that's going to be in that top 10. How is it not the number 1 moment in baseball? It doesn't make any sense to me. So I started looking into it, and then I got into the Negro Leagues, and I read a lot about the Negro Leagues, and I was kind of primed for this because of I was always very interested in Black American literature and fiction, poetry. And so I was ready for this. And then there was a lot of unintended consequences of the integration of baseball in the United States, unintended, that were extremely positive for I'm going to put in quotations, the white side of that, and extremely negative for the African Americans. And so prior to, the integration of baseball, you had a separate league that was primarily owned by African Americans, managed by African Americans, African American fans, and then you had all manner of businesses surrounding that league. You had, African American magazines, African American baseball magazines. You had fans and fan groups and people selling hot dogs and all manner of things that were completely destroyed by the integration. So what happened was Major League Baseball said, "Oh, we can get a competitive edge by taking the best players from the Negro Leagues and bringing them on our team. Okay, that works for us. We'll take all the best players. And there was a lot of unintended consequences. People celebrate that moment, and I agree it should be celebrated. But I think we have to forget, we forget that when we take action like that, a lot of people's businesses were destroyed. It was kind of like the end of the Harlem Renaissance, if that makes sense. The movement of Jackie Robinson from the Negro Leagues into the major leagues was kind of the end of the Harlem Renaissance. That's when, there seeming to be a decline in African American culture. So I think we have to be careful when we try to change things, or when we try to do things, that we don't destroy things that are already in place. Do you understand what I'm saying here, or am I going to get destroyed on social media for what I just said? Like you go to the Negro League Hall of Fame. I think it's in Louisville, Kentucky, or somewhere, and there's a sense of sadness about it. There's a aura of something was lost.
Well, I'm fortunate enough to be old enough to remember the black community, because the white community did not accept black people being equal or wanting to live in their communities. You here in Chicago, everybody in the block was somebody you knew. You knew the police officer, you knew the postman, you knew the doctor, you knew the lawyer, you knew the banker. And those people were sort of the people in the community, just like any other community, but it was a closed community. When integration came along, that was dissolved. The people who could afford the bigger homes and move further and further away from the inner cities did that. And so that destroyed the inner cities. I could remember as a kid, it was totally different. And when we went downtown, I do live downtown Chicago right now, but to come where I live right now, I never dreamed that I would live there one day. But the bottom line was that it was a big deal. It was a big deal because, and they would roll their eyes at you downtown here in Chicago this was in the 50s. So I can remember before integration came, and I can remember after integration. I lived that experience. It wasn't something I read out of a book. I actually lived the experience. I've also I alluded to the fact that I went to a school in Michigan called Allegan High School. And my folks moved from public housing here in Chicago because my mother saw what was happening way back then. She didn't want her children to be involved in gangs and the things that happened in the city. And my stepfather built the house. I helped build the house. So I actually built the house a couple of times now over, because I learned to do it because I saw it by example. Okay. So what I'm saying is that I saw the difference between the school that I went to when I lived in the projects in 22nd and State in Chicago, and the school that I went to in Michigan. Totally night and day. The books were better. The classroom teaching was better. The school was just generally better. They had tennis courts, and I thought I was nice because I came from an inner city school with rundown facilities. The books were raggedy. If you had the books, your parents had to buy them sometimes. So that is built-in racism. It's built in. My mother always said, you go to the school where the people who have and you'll have, where people learn and you'll learn. And she was right. And I actually had the experience of being a teacher in the Chicago public schools here on the West Side. And to this day, some of those big things that happened back in 1958 are still in the system. It's still, because it's based on taxes. Well, if I live in a situation where I got the most influent businesses in my area, my tax base is going to be huge. Where if you only got small businesses or no businesses, hardly run down businesses, you're not going to have that same privilege of having those same books. So it shouldn't be based on taxes. The only way a school should be financed is by the number of pupils or heads that those schools have in the state. All money should go into the state, and the state should disperse it on the basis of the number of students. That way everybody equalizes, okay? So we can do that. I can sit here and equalize a lot of things. Sometimes I talk to my wife and I say, I can straighten this out. It wouldn't take but a minute. The other thing, politically, we're talking about the Supreme Court today in the United States. There should be no office in the world that somebody's appointed to for life. Every time you do it, it's a mistake. I don't care whether it's Russia, United States, or the Supreme Court. That needs to change in our constitutional structure. There's things that are built in. No, think about this. You appoint somebody at age 25 or whatever the minimum age is, they can stay in 40 or 50 years. It's ridiculous. So things change and they stay the same, or they get aligned with the wrong people, or they line up the wrong way for the country. Not what's good for the country, but it's good for a few. They're there. That needs to change. There's a lot of things that structure. I always said we should have a constitutional convention in the United States every 50 years. Things change. They don't stay the same. I don't think George Washington would recognize the world today. No way. So those are kinds of things we need to look at, but we're not willing to change. We keep saying, well, okay, this was done, and this is the Constitution of the United States. And we keep doing the same thing. Change it where it needs to be changed. I don't say change it to change it. I say change it for the better. They say to get a more perfect union. We'll never get it if we keep doing the same thing. You tell me how you keep doing the same thing and then get some different answer. I don't know.
But I feel like sometimes the interventions that we try are, so in the social science, so you have hard sciences, math, physics, whatever. You and I are studiers of the social science, history, English, geography. Geography is both. Geography has a soft side and a hard side. But, to me, you study the way people use space would be a soft science of geography. So in the social sciences or the soft sciences, whatever solution you come up with is always the next problem. Okay, like there's no sense of like society changes and it constantly needs new solutions to problems. There's never the solution when you change a policy. I don't disagree that funding schools based on student volume is probably an excellent idea. It sounds like a no-brainer to me, actually. But I don't know how that system would be changed. There's some things that, sound pretty simple to me and make sense, and that's one of them. But, larger structural changes. So let's say you were to say, make a change like all African Americans are going to be paid if they can prove or if they are not descended from non-African American slaves. So if they are descended from African American slaves, they will be paid a universal basic income of this per month by the United States government forever. So let's say that's what some people are asking for, right? They're asking for reparations. They're asking for cash, for a cash payment. You go ahead and do that. Let's say that were to happen. Do you create new problems? Do you create are you taking away someone's franchise to care for themselves? Are you creating a group of people that are consistently on welfare? So how do you handle like situations where the answer is in a way creates another problem, such as that?
Okay, well, number one, the first problem you would get in what we are wrestling with now, reparation, white people resent it. The European population would resent it right away. You're giving them something that they didn't earn. We didn't do it. Our grandfather did it. Our great ancestors did. I know the arguments for that.
Sure.
But I also know the argument on the other side.
Sure.
You got a foot up in America because not all Europeans have a foot up. There's some poor. You can go to Hazard, Kentucky, or some of the places I've been.
There's a lot of white people that would say, "Hey, man, what are you talking about, bro?"
That's right. I've been there. But as a general rule, the people, you got to look at the way the world is right now. I just looked at something today about the economic gap between the richest and the poorest. In the 50s and earlier than that, the gap was a lot less than what it is today. Right now, we got people that own the whole world. You talk about, I hate to name companies, but you got companies that
name them.
What happens? Mergers. We merge. And my grandmother used to always say, the big fish eats the little fish. So now you got a whale. And that's what we're dealing with. And now there's a problem with that, because now the well can tell you exactly what you're going to buy and how you're going to buy it and when you're going, how much you're going to pay for it, because they control it. So we don't look at things that way. When I was a kid, you could take a one little guy could open up a drugstore or some type of haberdashery,
Sure.
and then he could open another, and he'd have maybe 5 stores or something, and that was
Sure.
good enough to feed us and everybody in the neighborhood. Now we got big people who resent paying $15 an hour, which to me is very. There's no income in that, but I mean, some people, they make it on
Sure.
that. You got now. Why would you resist when people have billions? There are some millionaires in America that own more than the wealth of some small countries.
Sure.
That's ridiculous. It's pathetic. And what does that lead to? What resentment? Number one. So you got
There's lots actually. There's probably 1,000 people in America, maybe 5,000 that have greater a greater asset base than many countries. But let me you made a point that I was hoping that we would come to here. So there's a sense in which I think, regardless of race, and then race is part of that. There's a sense in which our society is becoming less equal, and that there's a disparity. Although while many people are suffering from this, and when people say, well, "What are you talking about, Sylvester? You and Michael both carry around all of the world's knowledge in your hand, and you have access to the consumer goods from all over the world." And, all these types of things that they cite, like Steven Pinker would talk about how everything's better, crime statistics are down, and all this sort of stuff. And they talk at this, but I think there is a general sense that things are not getting better, and that their equality is growing. And I'm not going to try to cite statistics, but I know that you talk about the average CEO, I'm going to say, whatever, in 1981 would make 200 times the average employee. And now that's like 7,000 times the average employee. And so you have these disparities, and then the growth of athletes' salaries, for example, would be another point of contention. And then you have the growing trend towards consumerism as a sign of status. You have to have the latest thing and the latest that, or you're not a cool person. So you're looking at that, and then there's the issue of inequality, which I think is an issue, is a real issue in our society. How do you solve the inequality issue without introducing a toxic form of, socialism into the American movement?
Okay, well, here again, that word socialism is thrown around very freely and liberally today by certain people. Okay, first of all, look it up. Know what you're talking about. A lot of people have no idea what socialism. I'm not a socialist, but I just came from a communist country. I just visited Cuba not too long ago. But the bottom line is that social communism, Marxism. I mean, you got ism. Okay, I mean, being a historian, you know what I'm talking about. The bottom line is, what does a society do for its people? And it's not what it does for the people who are most wealthy, but the people who are at the bottom of the totem pole. A combination of socialism and capitalism is not a terrible thing. Okay. But if you don't look it up and you don't know what you're talking about, it's easy to throw a word around. He's a Nazi. What does that mean? Do you know what is a Nazi? Okay, so we got a lot of people who are uneducated. You throw a word out there, and we just run with it.
A Nazi is a very specific thing. Like it's not it's not a general term that you can label someone you don't like. Being a Nazi is a specific thing. There's characteristics of Nazis and then neo-Nazis. So I agree 100% on that. I like what you said about how, we have these isms. We throw these isms around and they're intimidating to people, right? People get weird about certain isms. So Canada's a social democracy. That's what it is, okay? The UK is a social democracy. France is a social democracy. The United States is probably a social democracy too, actually, although there's certain aspects of it, you guys haven't had the healthcare debate yet properly, I know.
It's an ongoing debate. We had it 60, 70 years ago. It's an ongoing debate in the United States. But, what is it that you can actually forget about race for a second? There was a bargain. We'll take winners and losers as long as there's those that work hard, the Horatio Alger crowd. As long as you work hard in the United States, you can get ahead. And if you get educated and you work hard, I think a lot of people are calling bullshit on that now. You look at things like the education debt. So people are told that you got to go to college, and so you know what you got to do? If you go to college and you get a degree, then you're on your way. Then you'll be set. And, people of means know that, hey, you want to be careful with how much college debt you take on in life, because if you take on a lot of college debt, you're going to be saddled with that. And so the people of means know that either you got to pay that bill up front, or that's a coming of age ceremony for you, and your parents are going to pay for it. But if you're a person of poor means and you're told that hey, you got to go to college and you got to follow your dream and study what you're passionate about and all these kind of things that, sound great. They sound so good. Sylvester, follow your passions, man. Go to college, go to Michigan State University, then you come out of that with $200,000 in debt and a degree in history, a master's degree in history. You might be in big trouble getting ahead, actually. And there's a lot of Americans of all races, but I think it's probably disproportionately falls on people of color. And that is where they're sitting on this they actually did everything that they were told they should do. Okay? They went to college, they graduated, they got a degree in something they were passionate about, and now they're screwed actually because they have $150,000 worth of college debt and they can't find a job. There's a problem. That promise is not being fulfilled by this society. And I think that's what a lot of people are pointing to and saying, hey, this is what I was told to do, and it ain't working out for me. And it's falling particularly hard on this other group of people over here. And so we need to, solve this issue. Is the promise gone, or was it ever there for African Americans? Or tell me a little bit about that.
Okay. Well, I'm one of those lucky people who went to school back some time ago. It cost me about $500 to get a bachelor's degree.
Mm-hmm.
You can't do that today.
No.
Because public education was totally different. It was better back then. The financing was all I had to do was pay books and lab fees.
Sure.
Before I went to a junior college the first year, couple of years, and then I transferred to a senior university. And so it cost me I got a scholarship, of course. I got through, and I pity the people who have to pay $200,000 to go to school. The other thing is we have been sold a bill of goods about, if you go to Harvard or you go to Yale or you go to the big schools, the big names. It's like driving a Rolls Royce or a Cadillac.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but what good does that really do? It's what you learn in school. That's what my parents taught me. I don't care where you go to school, it's what you learn. If you go to school, you go to Harvard and you don't learn nothing, or you don't make nothing out of yourself, you just went to school for nothing. You didn't learn anything.
Mm-hmm.
So the bottom line is that, where you go to school, we've gotten very elitist and we spend a lot of money. I think education should be a function of the government to a degree, because who benefits by having skilled people? The other thing, everybody don't need to go to college. Plumbers make pretty good money last time I figured out.
I was going to say that the trades is such a wonderful path to the middle class lifestyle, and in fact, it's also the number one way that a man in America becomes a business owner is through a trade, actually.
Right. The other thing is we've gone through this conversation. We've talked about the inequality to women, black, white, or other. Otherwise. Females just got the vote 100 years ago. 1920, I think they got the vote in this 2020. So that looks like
the men just got the vote 300 years ago. So
yeah, but
I mean,
but
we're not talking about, I don't like narratives. So here, let me ask you something else here. I don't like narratives that society is not the relations between men and women are not premised on the fact that men have discriminated against women for 750,000 years. I don't like conversations that interpret the world in a way of oppressor and oppressed. Now, are there times to do that? I think there are. But I think it falls apart more in gender relations than it does with race relations. It falls apart very quickly. Women are not a coherent special interest group. There's lots of different kinds of women, Sylvester, and they think different things. And again, when people say I'm a leader, I represent women, or I represent women, they're only talking about like a proportion of women, a percentage of women, but they're using the entire gender to gain power, and I'm suspicious of that. But and I don't like interpretations of history between the genders that are based on the women were oppressed by men. I think everyone, largely is getting out of a state of oppression here, and that's true for all people. And most people were serfs 1,000 years ago in Europe. Most Europeans were serfs, okay, serving their feudal landlord. So, I mean, you're talking about a move towards equality and towards opportunity that is largely for everyone and has been expanding. And the idea that the entire time that that has not happening and different groups are emerging at different times, and yes, that's happened. People were the slaves were emancipated in 1850. I can't remember the exact date, and then women were franchised in 1917, say, and these things are happening. There's a momentum to this. So I don't think we should throw the baby out with the bathwater here, Sylvester. We are progressing. We are getting better. There is a sense that the function of society is working. However, I think in the last 30 years, with globalization and some other factors, we've hurt that. And I think that's what's happening today, is from the period of time, say 1970s to 1980s, from that period, I don't know can't pick exact date, but from somewhere around, the mid 80s to the mid 70s, the deal came off the rails a little bit. And we stopped moving in the right direction. And we made policies that, maybe put too many people in jail, that did things. So I think we were progressing, and people can say, no, point to this, point to that. But overall, you see an expansion of if you look at history with the right kind of eyes, you see expansion in terms of human rights. You see more opportunities for people. Do you not share that opinion?
Okay, the reason I got into the male-female thing is that around the world, there have been Margaret Thatcher in England, Indira Gandhi. You have Pakistan had for a number of years.
Sure.
Bhutto in Pakistan had a woman. If women can lead in those countries, they can lead here. Even South American countries have had women presidents and prime ministers. Is that going back to, you remember what I said about being oppressed? There will always be resentment. There will always women, if they ever wanted to in the United States. They're not a monolithic group, so I understand that. Okay, there's all kinds of thinking amongst women. But if women ever decided to become more monolithic, they could take over everything. I mean, it's like they got 51% of the population. So,
but they're not coherent. Like that's never going to happen.
They're not monolithic. I just said that.
Yeah,
they're not.
Yeah, that's never going to happen.
I understand that. I think they're becoming a little bit more toward being more monolithic. Nothing is 100% monolithic.
But I don't think that men and women are stuck in some struggle where they're working against one another. I think that's a lie. I really think this idea that I think the narrative of competing groups based on gender and race is a bad narrative. I think there are problems that can be fixed. Okay. I don't buy it. It's particularly true when it comes between men and women. I'm a Canadian. I grew up, in a diverse neighborhood, but I'm not claiming to know the struggle of the African Americans. That's not what I'm claiming to say here. But I know for sure that historical narrative pitting men against women is incorrect. Men and women struggled together, and they built their families, and they loved one another. They had children with one another, and there's a are there cultures where we Westerners perceive that women are being oppressed? Yeah, maybe from our perspective, but I don't think it's correct for us to say, hey, those women should take off those hijabs and they should wear bikinis on the beach. Who are we to say? So, and I don't believe that the history of the human species is a narrative of men oppressing women, and that's a real thing. Like, a lot of people come out and say, hey, the history of our species is that of men oppressing women. I don't believe that. And I think that, are there, can we provide more opportunities for girls? Absolutely. Can we do things better? Sure. But men and women are not pitted against one another in some kind of struggle for the ages. I don't believe that. I don't think that, and I don't believe that.
Well, here I alluded to early on in the conversation, there's a such thing as one big word, and this word is respect. Respect for it. If I respect you and I respect your labor, let's say on a job, and the man is doing the same job that a woman is doing, she should be paid 100% of what he's paid. There's no doubt about that in my mind. And to do anything less than that, the man is held accountable and guilty of some minor exploitation. If she's doing the same job, she gets the same pay. As simple as that. I mean, right is right and wrong is wrong. And
Yeah,
sometimes
but it's not that simple. So they look at those statistics and they say, well, they look at all the jobs in America or in Canada, and they say, well, look, the average woman makes this, the average man makes this. There's a disparity. There must be something wrong. But there's explanations for a lot of that equalize it, eh? And for example, men do a lot more dangerous work than women.
I said the same job. Same job.
Right.
Same
yes,
job.
that's obvious. I think that that's been achieved.
I don't think so. I think women are still paid so much on a dollar than a man. And then an African American woman makes even less than a white woman. Society is stratified. It is stratified. Remember, I talked about the 6 basic things that are wrong, and you can go, and it's religion, it's sex, it's money, it's color. I mean, there are certain things that human beings do to separate themselves. And a lot of times they're done from not the point of view of trying to get to be equal and fair, but what's best for me and how much can I have 5 houses and 2 yachts, while the guy down here is over here in the corner, he's got nothing to eat even that afternoon. He's got to worry about his next meal, or she's got to worry about her next meal. America has become poor. When I was a kid, I never saw too many people on the street.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to give you my age. I'm 77 years old.
Ooh.
So if I go back a few years,
Sure, yeah.
I every now and then see a guy with a tin cup, but you didn't see this abject poverty that you're seeing. And right now in America, if we don't do something pretty soon, and because of the pandemic, that's not just America, that's worldwide. We're going to have an economic calamity that we have never seen before. The Great Depression is going to look like child's play if we don't do things that we need to do. It's not a matter if, it's a matter when you do it. You got to do it. I mean, you have to put money in people's hands, because if you don't have money in people's hands, they can't spend money and the society falls in. Okay. If you build a bridge, you got to build it from pier to pier. And if the piers fall in, the rest of the top of the bridge is going to fall in too. They're going to, you got to take care of a tree does not grow from the top down. Trees and plants grow from the soil up. So what we got is now, right now in the United States, we have a real top heavy. It's like a tree that's just toddling because it's top heavy. And you got the millionaires and the billionaires, and they think they're going to stay there. When the tree falls, guess what? Everybody comes down. It doesn't. Right now, if I'm a billionaire, what would I do with the pandemic going on with the money? I got $1 billion. I can't go traveling too much. You go all around the world. The virus is everywhere. It's not just in the United States or Canada. It's everywhere. So what do you do with all this money you got? What good does it do you? And will it stop you from getting the virus? No. So we got to take a good hard look economically where we are too, not just racially, but greed is rampant in America. I've held stocks and I know what stocks do. I've made money on stocks. So I knew I could sit in my living room and do absolutely nothing. But if I got my money on the right horse in the stock market, I've had days where I made pretty good money
Sure.
doing nothing. And this other guy, he's going to work, or this other gal's going to work, and they're breaking their butt and they're not getting ahead. That is going to cause a big problem. Race is going to cause a big problem. The environment's going to cause a big problem. I always say right now is an inflection point for how the rest of this century is going to be.
But let me ask you this. There's an inflection point. We're going to come back to it, but I have to ask you: Are these not social ills? Like, amongst, for me, I look at and I'm a Christian. Okay, so you take the word white privilege, which gets put out there. Okay. And so you say, well, hey, when we look at it from this perspective, it seems like there's a privilege to being white. Okay. And you look at the world, so you see all the countries that are predominantly populated by white people are richer than all the countries that are predominantly populated by non-white people. Okay. So that's something you can look at in the world. But to me, there's a better explanation. And I want to see if what you think of this. I think that people that live like Christians, okay, black or white. So if you take American statistics and you say, show me all the white people married to white people and the black people married to black people. So mixed race couples are out, non-married people are out. And there's actually not that big a difference. I think it's statistically unimportant. The differences in income between blacks and whites that are both married. And then you look at the communities they live in and you see that, hey, people that get married, stay married, and have two-income households tend to move to communities that are nicer and go to nicer schools. And they tend to have more time to raise their children. And they tend to have, more of a focus on getting to places that are better. And then you look at the statistics for, single families. It's a disaster. And then you look at what percentage of communities have single families and which don't. And that explains the disparities. Is there not a marriage privilege or a Christian privilege? Like, people, if you live a certain way, forget about the government for a second. Forget about the government. Forget about all the history in the past that can explain all the problems that maybe you're facing today and you get to hang your hat on. If we forget about that for a second, if you live a certain way, is there still a deal on the table that the vast majority of those people will get ahead, regardless of their race, regardless of their gender? Is that deal still out there, or is that dead, Sylvester?
It's not dead. I'll be dead if I say it's dead, because my wife would shoot me. But no, I've been married 41 years, and there's something to be said for, two people working together. There's a lot to be said, pulling together, solving problems together. And so I'm the first to say that. But you got to look at what conditions that the family is if I feel that I can't make enough, a male wants to feel like he can make enough money to sustain his family.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with that.
And if you can't get a job, and say you finished high school, but that's about as far as you got, and you didn't really get a break in life, then you got a family, you started too soon, you got kids. That's a lot of stress. And eventually that generally tends to break the family apart. 5, 6 years later, the stress of not being able to provide for your family and feel that you're the man of the household.
Yeah.
So that's a problem. And then we got the problem. I taught school, and I think I said that once before, I alluded to it, on the west side of Chicago, where the street gangs are rampant and all of that stuff. So I kind of got into all of that. And you could see kids come to school that didn't have their clothes ironed and they were dirty.
Sure.
And you get stories about daddy beat mama up. So I understand that the destruction of. But then the society also did something that was back in the 70s and the 50s. The man, if you were African American and your family was on welfare, you had to move out. You had to move out, and
Yeah, that was so destructive.
right.
Like that
Right.
policy was so like in a way. Never mind African Americans. It's like if you're on welfare, and this is in Canada too. So if the father or like some of these women have kids with more than one man or whatever, but if they develop a relationship with a man who loves them and wants to be with them and live with them, they cease to get like there is a monetary disadvantage.
Penalty. Yeah, penalty.
Yes. Like that's insane to me. It's so sad.
Yeah, we're on the same page. And so that was one of the things that counted for some of this. But now here, I'm going to give you an example in my own life. My stepfather, who was a great man, I'm fortunate enough to have a great stepfather, but we lived in public housing, but he was not supposed to be there. He was, but he was not supposed to be. So by living in public housing, we were able to buy, my folks were able to buy 40 acres of land in Michigan and built the house where my mother lived until she passed away. So they used that low rent, saved the money, and built the house. So they became homeowners.
Mm-hmm.
So they took it as a stepping stone. That's the way it was supposed to be.
But you see, like that's an example of a man and a woman working together and, taking care of children, teaching them, raising them properly. And with the, like, I don't care what anyone says, a father adds something different than a mother. And if somebody wants to argue with me about that, then you're going to be talking at a wall, because I'm just not listening to that. There's a difference between fathers and mothers. And when two people get together and decide to raise a family and even a stepfather or whatever, but if that deal is solid and they work together and they don't sleep with other people and they don't get involved with drugs and alcohol and gambling and the other vices that are temptations all around your life, you tend to be successful. And I see this white privilege thing, and I look at it and I say, okay, you have a correlation there. I'm not sure if it's causational, but you look at these statistics for people that stick together and stay married. And even when you look at athletes, so people that excel in professional sports are disproportionately from married homes, like the African American people. Now, LeBron James,
and they're born in January.
Yeah, there you go, and January. So there's Scott jumping in. But like LeBron James is a true outlier in the fact that he has a single mom, whereas Kobe Bryant had his mom and dad with him his whole life. And so I think there is this advantage to that. Why are we not talking about that? That's a wholesome, good thing to speak to, that it doesn't create, well, for some reason, you bring this up and people get angry with you, as if, you say, hey, look, we should teach kids that they should get into a monogamous relationship and stay in it for their life. And somehow you're seen as somebody that's not speaking the truth, Sylvester. And to me, the truth is that's the successful model that's worked for the human animal for hundreds of thousands of years. And it's no different today statistically. Why are people not talking about that more?
Okay, well, here we go back to education, and we go back to examples. Mm-hmm. If I don't have a job, I just got through saying, if I don't have a job and I'm a man, I'm not feeling the greatest about my manhood. Mm-hmm. And then I see Willie coming down the street, and he comes up on me, and he's got this big knot of money. He's got a brand new car, and he seems to be kind of successful. So my dad goes to work every day, and he's not driving a new car. We still in that old buggy we got. And I can stand on, and Willie tells me I can stand on the street and make more money in a couple of days than your dad makes in a month. All of those things come back. All of those things come back. I mean, I've seen it. I've seen, I was fortunate. I'm more than blessed as an individual. I've lived a life that I couldn't have dreamed of when I was a kid.
It sounds like it from the profile. Yeah, it's an awesome life.
But the bottom line is I had great examples. Mm-hmm. Great examples. My stepfather was a great man. My mother was I had the aunt that I wrote a book about. My book is The Road to Money. You see that on there. And
Mhm.
it takes you, went from the cotton fields of Money, Mississippi to a millionaire. A heck of a journey.
Wow.
Book about that. So to go from
I'm gonna
sharecropper
read that book, The Road to Money. I'm reading that one.
The road from money. It's from money.
From
She
money,
come
yeah.
from money. Okay, you know anything about Money, Mississippi?
No, I
Money,
don't.
Mississippi, where Emmett Till, a 14-year-old African American boy, was killed because they said he whistled at a white woman. He was disfigured, thrown in the Tallahatchie River in Money, Mississippi. That was the beginning of the U.S. Civil Rights Movement. That was before Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks. That started. If you look it up, you'll see it. Okay, my folks were raised in that town. I never been there, but all my folks came from that town. And the book came from stories told by my grandmother, my mother, and my relatives, my aunts, my uncles. That's where the book came from. But I thought, what a story. And my aunt,
Sure.
she went from the cotton fields of Mississippi, and when she was 79 years old, she took a trip to Southeast Asia. She went to Vietnam. She was quite the lady.
Yeah,
This
sure.
is not the African American. This is not the African American we see.
Mhm.
This is the real. We don't see African Americans a lot of times. We see the bad. When on the 5 o'clock news, some black guy that shot some woman, blah blah blah, some rapist, somebody snatched the purse.
Yeah.
Those are the people that we see and we hear about. I'm doing another chapter in the next book I write about images. What
Mhm.
images? Why does I get on the elevator with a white lady and she'll grab her purse and think I'm a bank robber or I'm fixing to snatch her purse or a rapist or something because she's been fed that story, the narrative that black is bad. These people are bad people. Don't be around them. Well, look at the movies. Indians didn't play Indians in the 50s. They took a white man and put paint on his face and he was the Indian in the story. I could never understand that. So you say white privilege. If I go to a bank to get a loan and a white person goes to the bank to get a loan, the white person is more likely to get the loan. That's white privilege. If I go into a store, even to today, I don't care who I am and what I am, I walk around a store and they'll follow me. But they're not, I'm looking at them, do they just follow me? And I've observed people. I stood back to watch how they follow some African Americans. That says to everybody because they'll steal before before a white person would steal. So, that's white privilege. When you can get a loan quicker than I get a loan,
But let me ask you something. But so are like when you say I can get a loan quicker than white people are richer than black people. That's a fact, right?
how did they get there? How did they get there?
Right. It's like so like white people are more likely to qualify for a loan than black people are. But that doesn't but I don't know if the decision is made because of the color of their skin or the factors because of that. Like what came first, the chicken or the egg? In this case, you look at slavery, maybe it was. But I don't know if that's institutional. Like, I don't know if that is an institutional thing or if it's more of a social problem. So, you could say, hey, this white guy who, has this life and that white guy that has that life go into a bank, that guy's more likely to get the loan. But what you're talking about is statistics. You're not talking about that there's a box in the loan category that says African American or not, and people have to check that, and then their credit score goes down. That's not what happens.
No, but when I walk in, my color is that box. He can see who I am. White people don't have that box, and it's hard to explain to somebody that don't walk a mile. It's like me trying to explain having cancer and I've never had it.
Sure, I get it.
You walk in a guy's shoes. It's hard for white people to understand. It's just they don't feel the pain of a lot of this. When you feel the pain of a thing, you look at it very differently from a person that's not feeling that pain. So the bottom line is that white person, if you want me to give you why it might be, he's probably got more access, to think because his dad may have been a foreman at the plant.
Sure.
Not another laborer at the plant, but when his kid gets out of school, he can get that promotion. He buys a house. Now the house becomes an asset. even if you take away the color.
But I think that's where the families come in. I don't think the fundamental distillation of it is race. I think the fundamental distillation of it is, how were you raised? Were you given a proper upbringing? Were you trained? Were you taught? Did you go to a good school? And I don't think it distills down to race. I think that the problems are more pernicious in the African American community than they are, but they're the same problems in other communities.
Okay, I have a question for you.
Sure.
Why is it that when minorities move into a white neighborhood, the white people usually take to, in the United States, that's probably in Canada, because I know a little about Canada too, but more or less the United States, they move away. So it's like running. You're fearful. You don't run from a thing you don't fear. You must fear to run from it. So these are.
Well, I'll ask you a counter question. Okay, I'll ask you a counter question. Why is it that Asians in Toronto primarily live in Markham? Why do they tend to live together in one community? So there's different pockets. And Toronto is an extremely diverse city. It's that second school you went to from your youth. Okay, it's the little United Nations. Okay, Toronto has people from everywhere. There's probably 1 million Chinese people in Toronto. 1 million, that's a lot. 1 million of anything is a lot, okay? That would be like the 20th largest city in the United States, 1 million people. So there's probably 1 million people, 1 million Chinese people in the greater Toronto area, and there's a massive population. They live in certain pockets of the city. They live together in certain pockets. Why is that? Why do they do that?
Okay.
Is it because they're afraid? Is it because they're afraid?
No, well, number one, they may be afraid. That may be a part of the equation. The other part of the equation is people, birds of the feather, flock together.
Yes, exactly. So why can that not be the explanation for what you said?
Okay, but what I'm trying to say is that's okay if you don't keep me from doing what I need to do. Okay, you live in a nice part of town.
Sure.
I live in a part, and I got the money, and I can move to your part of town next to you.
Sure.
Why would you impede me from you? Okay, you can have your friends, your neighbors. I'll give you a good example of why I say this discriminatory. World War II, the veterans came back. They fought for this country.
Mhm.
Black African Americans, after World War II was over, they came back. And there was a thing called a GI Bill here, where the government was to give education and benefits to the people that returned. The first suburb, one of the first towns built, and you can look this up, in the U.S. was Levittown, New York. It was Levittown, it's up in New York. And what they said, we don't want anybody but white people in our community. Although I fought. The Tuskegee Airmen, I just mentioned them a little while ago. They fought, they died. Some of them did get shot down, not the planes that they escorted, but they got shot down and killed.
Sure,
Now,
of course.
I come back
Dangerous
to my
job.
nation. Yeah, now I feel like I should be able to live any daggone way I want. I don't care if a white person or a Mexican or whoever lives next door. But you got this thing called restrictive covenant that says I can't live there. I'm a U.S. citizen. I fought for my country. I love my country. And they tell me I can't live next door because this is a white community. That is what I'm talking about. Look it up. Was the first suburb, one of the first suburbs built in the United States after World War II, before we got a lot of suburbs.
I believe you.
And that, yeah. So what I'm trying to tell you, the white privilege does exist. It does exist. And you can deny it till the cows come home. It does exist in the United States. Canada, I've been to your Chinatown. So I kind of know what it looks like. I love Canada. It functions a lot better than the United States in a lot of ways. A lot of countries do. Just
we have our own problems. Don't worry.
It's too cold. It's bad enough. It's too cold. I can't do that. But in the summertime, it's beautiful. I've looked at it from the top of the CN Tower. So I've been on Dundas Street or whatever that street is, but so I kind of know But the bottom line is that people have to respect one another. Quit looking at their color.
I agree.
Because I've never seen a clear person yet. Everyone, somebody you can see through has no color.
Yeah.
Okay. Everyone has the skin is the largest body of the largest organ of the body. the skin.
Sure.
And everybody has the skin to protect their organ. And that's as far as it goes. It doesn't make me smarter. It doesn't make me dumber. It shouldn't. Nothing should be inferred. But that's another human being. But all the respect that every other human being is due. When we get there, and that's that word respect. That's one of my favorite words, because if respect would come, because you can't beat your wife if you respect your wife.
No, for
Really,
sure.
I mean,
For sure.
Think about it.
For sure.
You can't enslave people that you respect.
Let me
So
make.
you have.
Let me ask you something, because we've gone 90 minutes now, if you can believe it. I don't know if you know that.
It's fun, I can talk.
I know. I had a good time chatting with you. Can I make a deal with you? I would love to read The Road from Money, and I want to read it because that does sound like a ridiculously fascinating story, actually, about your aunt and the town, and it's the context historically. I would love to read that book and then interview you again. Would you allow me to do that, Sylvester?
Certainly would. It be my pleasure.
Okay. Where can I find that book?
You can go to Boyd Books, but BOYD Books, BOOKS.net, BoydBooks.net, and I'll leave my autograph and send it right over to you.
I'm going to order it right after the show. I'm going to say I want a Sylvester Boyd Jr. signed on that for sure. I'm going to order. You ship to Canada, I take it? There's no problems with that?
No, I can get you to. Well, you're in the world, aren't you?
So I'm going to order. I'm going to order your book.
Give me that. Okay.
I will. I will. I'm going to order your book. And folks, if you've made it this far with Sylvester Boyd Jr., it's been my honor to speak to him. A real man of knowledge. He's gone a lot of different ways in his life, and I learned a lot on this show. So I really appreciate you if you made it all the way to the end of this one with me. You can find Sylvester Boyd Jr.'s books at boydbooks.net. That's BOYDBOOKS.net. Check it out right now. And hey, thanks for listening. Bye for now.